of fell into that's how I fell into this, and so I've been, really bound to it. It's the kind of thing where, I mean, after my first trip into Palestinian refugee camp, then I knew people there, and as their lives are sort of progressively truncated, and then wound up going into um, Palestine itself during the first Intifada. So the first film is Native Sons. It's about the refugees in Lebanon. The second one is People in the Land, which is about the period of the first Intifada, but it really concentrates on the American role. Uh, and then Two Blue Lines is Israelis, like Jewish, and I mean that in the terms of the humanist tradition, Jewish Israelis who provide narrative of the Palestinian experience.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Yeah, that's true. That's from People in the Land. Of the three, probably People in the Land is my favorite. Um, but I do want to get some background on the Freedom Flotilla. Like, what's all this about? So, 2007, the apartheid state, aka Israel, imposed a complete blockade on the movement of people and goods into and out of Gaza because they didn't like the fact that Hamas had won the 2006 parliamentary elections. Now, Jimmy Carter was there for those elections. He certified them as legit, but both the United States and the Israel regime rejected those results. Dov Weisglass, who was a senior Netanyahu advisor, the way he termed the blockade was that they put Gaza on a diet, allowing in just enough food to avoid a humanitarian crisis, unlike today, mass starvation, but not enough to let the population thrive. Gaza airport had been destroyed in 2001 at the beginning of the second Intifada, so there was no air route into Gaza. This Rafah crossing, which is on the very bottom, the south edge, Rafah crossing into Egypt has been under effective Israeli control with tacit collaboration from successive Egyptian administrations, American puppets, basically. The small port in Gaza City has been under an Israeli-imposed naval blockade since 2007. So land, air, sea borders have been locked down for 18 years. And this siege is pretty hermetic. And then the Israel regime would periodically do what they call mow the lawn, another term for mass murder in Gaza. And then here we are in this genocide, purposeful slaughter and forced starvation. And it's easily enforced because of this blockade. I think it's arguable that Zionist ideology has always been rooted in the idea of erasing Palestinian presence, physical and cultural presence from Palestine. So the blockade went on in 2007. About a year into that blockade, concerned international humans formed the Free Gaza movement. That was what it was originally called. First boats went out in 2008. They sent 31 boats between 2008 and 2016. 5 got through, but they were small boats. One boat, the Dignity, in 2008, they had 3.5 tons of medical aid aboard that the Cypriot government had contributed. That boat was rammed and nearly sunk and wound up limping into Tyre in South Lebanon. So that didn't get through. But the perennial motto of the movement is when governments fail, we sail. That's the deal. I do want to underline that the 2008 Free Gaza movement forward until today, that humanitarian aid delivery has not really been the primary objective of the missions. The primary objective is to open a maritime corridor for free movement of people and goods, not just in the midst of this forced starvation, but the idea that Palestinian human beings have the right to come and go from their land under their own control like human beings, this whole self-determination thing. I mean, that's really what the hole we were trying to punch. If a corridor is open, then forcing starvation would be impossible. Denial of medical care, denial of educational opportunities, those things would become impossible. In 2010, it was then the Gaza Freedom Flotilla sent the Mavi Marmara mission. So there were 8 boats on that run. They were all hijacked. The IDF murdered 9 people, wounded 30, one of them mortally. And but that didn't stop the missions. So Free Gaza movement has evolved now into the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, and there's 14 countries involved in it now. Well, I figure if you're here, then over the last 2 years, you have probably been at your wit's end, desperate to do something more than chant in parks. I've been chanting in parks for 40 years about this, and it has had less than zero effect on holding the Israel regime accountable or our own government accountable. Now, the thing is, if we put a map of the world on the wall and we turn out the lights and we throw a dart, we will probably hit something awful that's happening on this planet. But nowhere are the bloody handprints of the United States clearer than they are in Palestine. Apartheid Israel is the single largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid, despite having a population smaller than New York City. Some years it has received as much as 6 times the funding of all sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it's absurd in its magnitude. The regime also receives the most advanced U.S. weapons. Now, the thing is, both of these things, the cash and the arms, are illegal transfers under our own laws. Specifically, the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which prohibits any aid to any country with a consistent pattern of gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. It's also illegal under the Leahy Law, which prohibits the government from providing military or other assistance to foreign security force units if there is credible information that unit has committed gross violations of human rights. Now, there's no question, not even from our own U.S. State Department human rights reports by countries, that our government is illegally funding this state. It's a violation of U.S. law for them to receive a penny or a bullet from us. But the most egregious enabling behavior of Israeli war crimes by the U.S. it's not the money or the arms, it's our UN Security Council vetoes. More than half of all the U.S. vetoes in the UN Security Council since the UN was founded were used to protect Israel regime's crimes from the force of international law and to block the will of the international community. More than half. So whether we like it or not, we are all complicit in the crimes of our government by the people and the crimes of the apartheid regime. When we pay our taxes on April 15th, we're paying to kill Palestinians. When we buy a gallon of gasoline, we're paying to kill Palestinians. When we buy a shot of tequila, we're paying to kill Palestinians. Every time we pay a penny of tax to this government, we are paying to kill Palestinians. So what then must we do? This is like it's tattooed on the inside of my skull in lights. What then must we do? Well, resist. Now, there are lots of ways of doing that. One of them is BDS. 2005, prior to the Gaza blockade, a coalition of 170 plus Palestinian civil society organizations launched the BDS campaign. And the idea is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I'm going to put a couple of links in for this. Come on now, stay. From the people that started this campaign, because that's a pretty good source. Just in terms of what the boycott's about, and what products and corporations we ought to boycott. It's a pretty simple principle. The Palestinians are entitled to the same rights as the rest of humanity, and any organization or corporation that is preventing that is complicit and should not be getting a dollar of our money. And the thing is, okay, it doesn't seem like a bold move to just not buy something, but BDS did impact the struggle to end South African apartheid, and it can impact the struggle to end the Zionist genocidal apartheid. This idea of what then must we do, it's really, ever since my first trip into a Palestinian refugee camp, it's been sort of flashing on the inside of my skull. Demos, marches, letters to legislators, documentaries, the standard Palestine solidarity moves. And those, it's very clear, have had zero impact in the 40 years that I've been going to protests. None of that's prevented this spiraling into a full-on live stream genocide with absolute impunity. I speak for myself. I don't speak for the Freedom Coalition, the Flotilla Coalition. But I don't see any way around an imperative moral obligation to get on the boat, either metaphorically or physically, to put skin in the game in the face of my own and my country's complicity in this genocide. And I don't think anybody that was on the mission, either one of the missions that I sailed on, really felt this was a choice, that it's an imperative moral obligation. I don't see any way around nonviolent direct action to address this catastrophe. And JVP has been riding point on this, blocking the Brooklyn Bridge, occupying Grand Central Station, sit-ins in legislative offices, skin in the game. The Conscience was my second Freedom Flotilla Coalition mission. My first was last summer. It was called For the Children of Gaza. And the idea was, I got on in Lisbon, and the idea was we were doing consciousness-raising events up into the Mediterranean, and then we were supposed to meet two boats in Istanbul. One was a cargo ship with 5,000 tons of aid on it, and the other was a small passenger ship that was going to carry medical volunteers. Well, both of those boats, days before they were supposed to sail, were deflagged by Guinea-Bissau. Basically, you can't sail without a ship being registered to a country for any number of reasons. And so that mission was stymied, but Jim Koenigsacker, who was working with me on that trip, we did produce a short documentary called Voyage of the Handala, which really gets at the mission. That thing is on the festival circuit right now, so I can't really do a share on it. I also want to add that the Freedom Flotilla Coalition isn't the only global effort to break the siege. Global Samud Flotilla, Samud means steadfastness in Arabic, they sent 44 small boats. Those were all hijacked, crews kidnapped. The FFC has sent 4 missions this year. The first was the Madeleine, which was a small sailor that Greta rode on. The Conscience was supposed to make a run back in May, but it was hit with 2 drone strikes, and which crippled the vessel. So it took 3 months for it to get patched up and operational again. The Handala, which I rode last summer, made us a solo run. It was also hijacked and everybody was kidnapped. And then there's this effort called the 1,000 Madeleines, which the idea is to send 1,000 small boats. We had 9 started with us or sort of got in front of us. We joined them later. 2 of them had to drop out because we hit some really heavy seas and a couple of the boats were damaged. But basically we sailed with 7 of those. Our mission this summer was a media and medical workers mission. Why media and medical workers? Well, the medical infrastructure in Gaza has been all but obliterated, and hundreds of doctors and nurses and medics have been murdered, and medical aid is barred from entering. Many of those medical professionals were killed in targeted killings. Many were killed with their entire families. So there's a profound need or shortage of medical professionals and supplies. We had 40 physicians and nurses on the mission, and we had specialties ranging from OBGYN to trauma surgeon to mental health professionals. And they showed up with a heap of medical supplies. We had about $110,000 worth of medical supplies with us, which on its face is just a drop in the ocean of need. But these cases, suitcases full of antibiotics, painkillers, you name it, medical gear, could save lives. I mean, a little box of antibiotics could save a child's limb. So the medical workers brought skills and gear so that they could step off on arrival, assist the surviving and utterly overburdened Palestinian medical workers in the few remaining operational facilities. Why medical? Why media workers? Why medical on the one hand and why media workers on the other hand? Well, journalists and their support crews have also been murdered by the hundreds in targeted assassinations, many with their entire families. The genocide regime justifies this mass murder with claims that Palestinian journalists are Hamas propagandists, so it's okay to kill them. At the same time, the regime has barred international journalists from operating independent of the IDF. Now, that circle don't square. So here we come. Media workers of every stripe, TikTok influencers, Instagram mavens, Facebook old farts, documentarians, credentialed journalists. So we're geared up, we're ready to roll. I could go on for an hour of our encounter with the business end of the genocide regime's piracy program. We'd been told to expect 45 minutes warning. We figured we'd spot them on radar about 45 minutes out. But when they attacked, we were in the midst of a fair amount of shipping. So an IDF destroyer had slipped into traffic behind us off Port Said, Egypt. And they had about a dozen Zodiacs with them loaded with troops. So when the attack was detected at 4:30 in the morning, and the loudspeakers are going, "This is not a drill, this is not a drill, they're coming." We had less than 15 minutes before choppers were vomiting troops out, rappelling on ropes onto the upper deck, and the laser dots were on our chests. I think it's enough to say that everyone was assaulted to one degree or another, physically assaulted to one degree or another. Some people of color primarily were brutally beaten in front of us, which is a really hard thing to watch. We're a nonviolent organization, and it's hard to watch your friends being beaten. Basically, the drill was cruelty. It's a nonviolent humanitarian mission, and the drill was cruelty. We were hijacked in international waters. We were kidnapped. We were robbed. They stole property from virtually everybody. Once we got to Ashdod, they imprisoned us. So basic piracy. And I think the toughest thing for us, look, 94 Palestinians have died in Israeli custody. So, I'm really not comfortable with like going into a lot of detail about what we went through because we all lived. Um, as unpleasant as it was. But the really tough part was that our failure to make it to Gaza. Um, the thing is that the apartheid state says just bring aid to Ashkelon and we'll deliver it, which is a bold-faced lie. Last Friday, UNICEF announced that they were unable to deliver 1 million syringes that are needed for inoculations in a community that is being shredded with disease. There are 70,000 new cases, preventable cases of hepatitis there right now, a direct result of infrastructure demolition. Well, all that medical aid we were carrying isn't going to save a single life, and that was a harder thing to digest than the abuse. There would be no additional help in the medical facilities. There would be no external affirmation of Palestinian journalists' skill and accuracy. We defied the blockade. We made the run, but the blockade didn't budge. Now, the thing is that, for 2 years, we've all been watching the shredded bodies of Palestinians on our phones. And now there's an alleged ceasefire in place. And so those are going to be fewer, and it's not going to be quite such exciting viewing. But as of this writing, 260 Palestinians have been murdered since the ceasefire was official, more than 600 wounded. So the booms and the bangs and the bullets may have slowed, but those 6 U.S. vetoes in the Security Council, the vetoes of the ceasefire resolutions under both Biden and Trump, prolonged the destruction long enough for this genocide to gain a critical mass momentum of its own. They don't need to fire a bullet. They don't need to drop a bomb. 90% of the housing stock in Gaza has either been damaged or demolished. So there aren't roofs over people's heads. Those demolitions continue apace beyond this alleged yellow line in Gaza. The medical infrastructure is obliterated. The water, electrical, sanitation infrastructure is demolished. Disease and starvation and malnutrition are at a gallop, regardless of whether anybody fires a gun. And winter is closing in. It gets cold in Gaza, cold enough to snow, which may not fit your image of it, but it's true. So, ceasefire or no, this moment screams for an aid mission on the magnitude of the Berlin airlift. I mean, if we would do the Berlin airlift for the capital of the Third Reich, then the world can do aid at scale to Gaza. The control of the entry points have got to be wrested from the grip of the genocide regime, a regime whose own prime minister has an arrest warrant hanging over his head for this blockade. Every crossing has got to be open for unlimited aid. Gaza's airport runways have to be repaved with haste so that aid can fly in and the grievously wounded can be flown out for care that's impossible to deliver in the remains of the medical infrastructure in Gaza. And a maritime corridor, our mission, the purpose of our mission, has got to be open for the free movement of people and supplies. In the absence of a comprehensive end to the siege and a massive global aid effort, I doubt very much that a single Palestinian infant will survive this winter. The conditions of life have been made impossible. That's what we accomplished, not just with our weapons that we provided, but those 6 vetoes of ceasefire resolutions prolonged this to the point that place is essentially a desert of rubble. We've watched 2 years of mask off, full-on slaughter, total impunity, I think there's a warning in there for humanity. If this can happen to anyone, then by definition, it can happen to anyone. And I think for those who are capable of including Palestinians in the definition of human being, this is excruciating. So what then must we do? We must get on the damn boat, either metaphorically or physically. Uh, we are faced with imperative moral obligation to respond to this. This is not a drill. This is genocide. And it's up to us to stop it. That's what I've got to say. I'd be glad to take any questions or comments that any of you.
Thank you so much, Tom. There are quite a few people on the webinar, so if you have a question, if you could please use the raise your hand signal under the react, under react in the bottom. And I see that Charlene has posted a question in the chat. Charlene, would you like to lead off with your question? You can unmute yourself.
Up. Okay. Yeah, I know this is going to sound kind of weird, and it's the same sort of thing I have to ask when I'm coaching students in the We Are Not Numbers program for vivid details. I mean, you feel sort of, it feels inappropriate. I know it wasn't a walk in the park that you experienced, but I kind of like I want to get beyond the ideas and really know what it felt like to be on that boat, like about how many people were on there, what languages did people speak, how did you communicate, what was it like to be put in an Israeli prison, like where were you incarcerated? I just guess I want to enter the whole thing imaginatively. So I feel like maybe I was there a little bit. I know that how weird that sounds, but
Well, sure.
yeah, details.
Well, there were 92 of us on the boat, 10 crew, and the rest there were people from 24 countries. So there were a lot of languages. But, English has become the lingua franca of our planet, mostly because of the dollar, I think. So mostly we communicated in English. Sometimes somebody would have to translate, but we had people from, we had a big medical contingent from Malaysia aboard. We had people from virtually every member of the EU. We had people from New Zealand on board. But the thing was, everybody there was of one mind. I mean, everybody there knew that we knew that the boat had been hit with 2 drone strikes previously. We knew that we were actually risking our lives, and we all were, I won't say comfortable with that, but very focused on the mission. And there were, it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be in that community of people. It reminded me a lot of the first Intifada in Palestine, where a community with a common vision of a better future, willing to sacrifice. There was, big energy on the boat. We drilled a lot. We practiced for the assault. We'd hoped we wouldn't get one, but we practiced for it. So. And we did that day and night because the deal was that we had to be sure that when the boat was assaulted, we would not present anything resembling a threat, especially because they killed so many people on the Mavi Marmara. So, we created affinity groups. There were 4 days of nonviolence training in Italy prior to us even boarding. Where, so there was, a lot of sort of community building, and we formed into affinity groups. And so, all our drills and stuff like that, most things we kind of hung in our affinity groups. Um, we, but there were different things like, one night was for, the stories. Several of the doctors had done missions through Rafah crossing during the genocide. Some had done missions in Gaza prior to the genocide. So they related their experiences there. One night was about journalists that we know in Palestine. Actually, I skipped that night because there are just some stories I don't need to bring those things up in my own mind. One night we had sort of a poetry and song night. So, there were only 8 Americans, including a couple who were crew. So, so I shared a couple of songs from the civil rights movement, and we all hollered them out. "This Little Light of Mine" and "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." So we all hollered that under the stars and there were drones, above us several nights. I would say things that really stick out about the experience. One is that when they were getting ready to take us off the boat, they were taking us off. This was they took over the boat. They drove it into Ashdod, and then when we got there, of course they were abusive. They held us in the cafeteria for 14 hours, and threatened us with collective punishment. Nobody will be able to go to the bathroom if you talk. Stuff that's just like, come on. But when we were getting ready to get off, there's like this sort of passageway outside on the upper deck where we're lined up waiting to go down and then up the gangplank. And I use the term gangplank because it was very much like dealing with pirates. And when we were lined up like that, that's when we started seeing our comrades beaten, because there was a group of what are called border guards, which is a paramilitary force. They're not the army and they're not the police. They're this gang of thugs. And anyway, so, different people got different treatments. Some people would just be, they would like these guys would grab your arms, lift them above your head, shove your head down around your knees, and then fast march you into this holding area. Some people were zip tied, then lifted by their zip tied arms and fast marched over. And then there were our friends who were just dragged off the gangplank and just beaten brutally. So I watched Hisham and Ali really beaten, and after that, when they were beating Hisham, they ordered us all to turn around and face the ship so we couldn't watch them beat Hisham. And the thing was, these were like, this is like at gunpoint orders. But I think one of the most disturbing things to me about the experience, they put us in this holding area, and a lot of us were zip tied, some weren't, but basically forced us to kneel on concrete with our heads down, assume the submissive posture. And, for 15, 20 minutes, that's not really a big deal. But it gets to be 45 minutes, an hour and a half on your knees on concrete, and it hurts. I mean, it hurt. Well, I got 70-year-old knees, and I was in pain. There was a young man to my right, I believe he was from Belgium, and he was hurting. And at one point he said, "This is torture," which I agreed with him. But shortly after he said that, 2 soldiers came over and they knelt down beside him and they said, "Are you hurting?" He said, "Yes, I'm really hurting." well, that's when they zip tied him. That's when they zip tied him. So he couldn't rest any of his weight on his hands after that. And the thing was that it wasn't the pain really that was the disturbing thing. It was that when somebody would whimper, we're surrounded by soldiers. And when somebody would whimper, there would be a wave of laughter and giggles around us. That disturbed me. That they found it funny. That you know, cruelty is entertainment. That really bothered me. When I finally was taken in for processing, and this was everybody, they get into your bags, they start either throwing away your belongings or just stealing them. Like, so my audio recorder, my camera gimbal, they stole that. My headphones, they stole that. I was using an iPhone. I had thrown my phone, my computer, and my notebook overboard as soon as we saw the Zodiacs coming in. Everybody threw their phones overboard. That we weren't going to allow a lot of computers to, but we weren't going to allow them access to any information, personal information. But you know, I take medication. I'm not a spring chicken, and I gave them my list. I had my medication with me, so then they gave it to a doctor. I said, okay, I need this. I'm supposed to take this every day, and they said, yeah, fine. But then they took my medication. Then the next was a kind of a strip search light. After that, then there was an interrogation. We had had a lot of briefings in our training, and we knew you basically you answer every question by saying, I want to speak to my lawyer, and I want to contact my consulate. Because we had all signed a power of attorney to Handala, which is the Center for Minority Rights in Israel. So we had that. So that was my bit, and they made fun of me a lot about that because that's all I would say to any question that they asked me. Finally was taken to a hearing, and so basically with some kind of judge or administrator. None of this is explained, it's Hebrew. But I ran the thing, I want to speak to my lawyer, and they knew where the lawyers were going to come from, and the judge said, Handala, and I said, yeah, and so I was lucky, and that 30 seconds later, I had an Handala attorney beside me. We've been through all the forms of what they were going to try to get us to sign. I signed a request for expedited departure, which basically, I also wrote all over the bottom of it that I had not entered Israel illegally. I had been kidnapped in international waters and forced to enter Israel against my will. And then they took us off, and they zip tied us real good, and then blindfolded us, which is pretty standard. I mean, I've got footage from 1988 of them doing this to Palestinians. And as soon as the blindfold goes on, somebody punches me in the head, which I thought was such a lame-ass thing. They've already got me zip tied, number one. Number two, I've got nonviolent training. And I just felt like, if you want to punch me in the head, look me in the eye and punch me in the head. Don't. Anyway, it just bugged me. So then we were shoveled into cells on a bus, and we rode for about 2 hours to Ketziot prison, which is in the Negev desert. It's a real, it's a prison with a reputation. Like, I'm sure that a lot of the 94 people who have been murdered in Israeli prisons in the last 2 years were murdered there, and we could hear them sitting dogs on prisoners, and but I consider our treatment is like the hors d'oeuvres on the way people are treated, the way Palestinians are treated. When I've have a lot of friends in Palestine, and most all of them have been in custody. And when the blindfold goes on, the clubs and rifle butts and boot start coming down. So mostly we weren't. I would consider it light. Also, there were enough bunks for everybody in the cell, as opposed to us being packed in so that only some people in the cell could sleep at a time, and then the rest of the people would have to stand around the edges. I mean, that's more of the Palestinian experience in Israeli jails. So yeah, we had a place to sleep. The food thing wasn't really much. We wouldn't take anything from the soldiers when they hijacked the ship, because this is an army is starving people to death on purpose. So we weren't going to accept anything from them. But once we got into the prison, I kind of felt like if there was any food, I had already paid for it with my taxes. But there wasn't much of that. I think actually in the 36 hours in custody, I think there was one actual meal. But they marched us around a lot. They screamed at us a lot. They called us fucking terrorists. That's the direct quote. Which I thought, if people trying to deliver aid under a genocide are terrorists, then we really got to work on that word. We did get a visit from there were a bunch of us. I mean, we were in a cell block. The women were in a cell block. We were in a cell block, which had, I think there were 15 cells in the block. There were still a few people from the Global Samud Flotilla up the way from us. The toilet in their cell was basically just like a feces pump. So their cell was basically covered in shit. But we were spirited. I mean, because we could hear each other, then we would chant and holler and sing sometimes, just as a defiance, just as defiance. They would march us out every now and then. When we got to Exile, the first thing they did was strip search us, which, I guess, it's on one hand, that's a humiliating thing, to be forced to undress in front of a gun. But, I don't think there's anything as humiliating as April 15th. I mean, nothing could humiliate me after paying taxes to kill my friends. So that was just, it's like, what do you expect from them? They was taken to see a physician, told them what my medications were. They said they'd get them to me, but I was refused my medication all the time I was in custody, which actually, for the kind of medication I take, is actually a very dangerous thing. I could have had a stroke or a heart attack because of it. Diabetics among us were also refused their medication. So, things that don't leave marks, stress positions like having to spend an hour and a half on your knees, 2 hours on your knees, doesn't leave marks. Or denying people their medication, it doesn't leave marks, but it can damage you, Finally, I'll tell you one thing, which I don't know, maybe it's sort of funny to me, or it was funny to my cellmates, but it was this idea of defiance. At one point, this guy comes in. He's in. They're all swatted up. They're in body armor, guns, lasers, and the guy starts toward our door. He's got his laser on the chest of a friend of mine. I sailed with him last summer on the Handala. We roomed together during nonviolence training, and he's got his laser on my friend. So I just stepped in front of it and we started walking toward him. He's screaming, "Move back, move back." And I said, "You got a cigarette?" And that became a kind of our cell joke, that when anybody would, if they had us out of the cell and they were screaming at us and trying to intimidate us, I would always go toward the loudest, ugliest one and go, "You got a cigarette?" Which provided a lot of entertainment for my cellmates, just because it was so inappropriate. It was just, "No, you're supposed to be scared. You're supposed to cower before the might of this thing." But that was kind of my drill, was just try to act just completely oblivious to them threatening me. So that was what it was like. It was a spirited bunch. And so we didn't let it get us down too much. There was one thing that really, really bothered me, though. There was a tiny woman. She's an ex-Israeli. She has forsaken her Israeli citizenship. She lives in LA now. She's a TikTok influencer, or Instagram. She's an Instagram maven. She has a huge following. Her name's Noah. And but she's a tiny person. I mean, she's a pocket person, so frail and small, and they beat the shit out of her. I mean, they've changed her face. I talk about humorous things about it, but there were things about it that were not funny. That was really awful. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Tom. Sorry to make you relive that.
Mahmoud has a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, Mahmoud?
Yeah, I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Tom. Well, in a lighter note, I was doing research in the Handala Voyage of Handala. Yesterday, there was a huge write-up at the Post by the Ohio University. I was happy to hear that 5,000 people watched the documentary at the International Film Festival in Madrid, and 11,000 people watch it online.
Yeah.
By the way, this documentary was produced by Tom and his former student, one of his former students. My question is, when is this documentary going to be premiered in Ohio? That's the reason I called.
Well, that's a good question. It's out on this festival run right now, and the hopes are that it gets enough runs that it's either picked up by Netflix or Amazon Prime, so that it's available free to a lot of people. So that's kind of the quest right now. I mean, my position is just throw it on YouTube, but Jim, my partner on this, he's pretty bent on us trying to get a push for a really, really broad audience. So that's what's going on with that right now.
Thank you, Tom.
We have a question in the chat from Sonia, and so I think she probably wants me to read it. While the flotilla was prevented from completing its goals, what impact do you think the mission
had on the global stage.
Yeah, thank
Um, well, I'm not sure about that. I think it's like, look, you know, my adult life has been pretty focused on trying to find a way to make an impact on this, something to move the stone. And I think about my forebears. I'm from Vermont. Vermont was a abolitionist state before there was a United States, and generation on generation of Vermonters worked to end slavery, and they didn't give up. They just one generation after another. The abolitionist movement went on for centuries, and that's how I feel about this effort. We didn't succeed, but we are trying to grind down this siege. If you know, if we don't succeed this time, then we will sail again. We will sail again, and we will keep on doing this until there is a maritime corridor into Gaza. As much as anything, I think we said with the mission that that sitting on the couch is not enough. That being upset about the genocide is not enough. That acting in some way, you know, putting skin in the game. So while we didn't succeed on this mission, which is really a heartbreaker, you know, hopefully we scuffed the edge of the blockade at least. If enough people do that, we'll wear it down.
There's a question in the chat, Tom. What is your situation now at OU?
Well, I'm basically been eliminated from student contact. So they didn't fire me. They didn't lock me out of my office. What they did was they removed me. I'm on kind of a mini sabbatical this semester. This is my last semester at OU. But they gave me some course relief. So I was only teaching one course in person. And it's core curriculum. It's really sort of fundamental course for my students. And actually, the only reason I stuck around this semester was to teach this one course to this cohort. So basically, they just removed me from it, and which I grieve over because they punished my students, basically. They punished my students for me being on this mission. Because I've been teaching that course for 20 years. I built the course. Nobody's gonna like step in over a weekend and pick up that curriculum. It's just completely absurd. So basically they trashed up the curriculum for these kids. Fortunately, during COVID, I'd been forced to produce streamable lectures, complete streamable lectures for the whole course, because you couldn't make it work on Zoom because of the variable bandwidth that different people had. So I'd made it so it was downloadable. And so while I was on the mission, they were keeping up with the curriculum through those lectures, and they were also using them before, because I have a lot of students whose first language isn't English, so they were going back and working those. So they were always available to the students. And so once I was removed from the class, and the university removed the lectures from the learning management system, then I just uploaded them all to Dropbox and then sent the links to all my students so that they could at least remotely finish the curriculum for the course. So you know, I still have I have a remote class where I sit and work through edits with students, but basically no direct contact, you know, not in any direct contact face to face with students now. That was the university's strategy to deal with me, which really, you know, the students walked out of the class the first day the substitute was in there, they went and had a meeting with the dean about this. My alumni, like 20 years back, wrote the provost and the president of the university about this because this particular course really had an impact on their lives. So anyway, it's just pathetic, you know. This is a genocide, for God's sake. You know, the reason that they removed me from the class was because I changed the mode from in-person to remote for 2 weeks. I think this is force majeure. You know, responding to a genocide. Genocide is the one rule in the universe that can't be broken. And I just feel, it's so ironic or sad or something that, you know, they didn't protest like the fact that I had been kidnapped and imprisoned without charges. No, they just made it so that I couldn't be with my students.
Just as a follow-up to that, Tom, I mean, I'm wondering, you know, that seems like very severe. It's a very severe reaction to someone changing the mode of instruction. It, you know, it kind of happens all the time in really informal ways, you know, where people don't get approval for absences or going to conferences, and, you know, they just kind of wing it with their students. So do you feel like this was, I mean, it feels like it was covertly politically motivated to have such a strong, you know, censure on your ability to teach your students?
Oh yeah, I thought it was just completely off the chain. You know, because, you know, my colleagues, you know, if they have a shoot or something, they just disappear and go off on a shoot, or they get a festival acceptance and they go off to the festival, or, you know, people do that all the time. And the thing was, I had maintained curricular continuity, that by, you know, that nothing in the syllabus changed, that they still got the lectures that were scheduled, the films that they were supposed to see during that period. So, yeah, I just thought it was, well, and the thing was that when they told me that, I was told on the 13th, Monday the 13th of October, that I had been removed as an instructor. Well, the thing was, the substitute teacher hadn't taught their first class yet. That the first class was going to be the next day. I could have walked back into the classroom. So yeah, this was about getting me out of the classroom. It wasn't, in fact, the dean told the students that the question wasn't the quality of instruction, but it was the mode of instruction. That's what counted to the university, which, that's just pathetic. I mean, that's not why people enroll in a class, you know, that the mode will be consistent in this class. So yeah, I thought it was ridiculous, and the AAUP, you know, the sort of faculty organization, sent their response in saying that they thought this was ridiculous and over the top. So yeah, I thought it was just complete, you know, I mean, they could have docked my pay, or they could have sent me a reprimand. They did want to check with me that I really was going to retire. I think if I hadn't already announced my retirement, I think I might have been retired. But they didn't have to go that far because it was already on the books. So, but I've been back anyway. You know, I've got stuff I'm working on down there. I've got, you know, I've got students who are working with me on a documentary I'm working on right now. So they're doing a lot of archive recovery. I also spoke at a SJP event, or actually, no, it was the ACLU event down at OU, and it was packed. I mean, it was packed. So I'm still in contact with students, just not in the class that my students would value me in the most.
Okay, Mahmoud had his hand up for a while. Do you still have a question, Mahmoud?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh.
Any other questions?
Oh yeah, well, Noah did receive medical care. She did. It's just NOA. It's not NOAH. But if you look for her, you'll find her. Oh, wait a minute. Let me I got a couple flotilla links. Let me put these in here. Anyway, if you look around on there, you can find her and you can track her down. But she did post a piece right after she got to Istanbul, where you can see that she had really taken a beating. But she's tough as nails, you know. She's okay. I mean, well, I mean that's a funny word for it, okay. I mean, being shackled and abused, beaten when you're shackled, you know, that's not something you're going to be okay with. But she's tough. As far as, oh yeah, so anyway, there's links to the flotilla, you know, every now and then they'll put up a post for applications, you know, if you want to get on the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
We have a question from Deborah Maria. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, I can't really show my face. I've already experienced repression 35 years ago standing up for Palestine. But I just wanted, Mir Yoder had given a gentle reminder to many of us to really consider calling our governmental people. And it's like preaching to the choir here, but it does make a huge difference. I've been told to call our Congress people and everything. And thank you, Tom. I remember meeting you many years ago, and your work has really been very influential in my life. And thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm with you that we have this cultivated sense of powerlessness. You know, we are told constantly through our media that basically they're going to make the decisions, shut up, you know, enjoy your spaghetti or whatever. But you know, contacting our representatives and our senators, and you know, actually like trying to talk to them and letting them know what we think and how we feel. You know, I think especially after this New York City election, you know, this could be a pivotal moment just because American politicians have been running scared for decades from AIPAC. And AIPAC was beaten. I mean, beaten and thrown to the gutter in New York City in this mayoral election. And I think, you know, we may be at a turning point where our politicians will actually listen to us because they've seen that you can actually take a brave position and win. So you know, actually engaging the political process, actively engaging the political process, you know, I believe we can take back America. If we do this in mass.
Leslie, I see that you left a question and I cannot find it in the chat. If you'd like to ask it, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, my question is about the boycott. I'm wondering, one, if you have any advice. I've been using Disoccupy, and originally I was quite shocked to see how many companies are actually supporting Israel in multiple ways. Sometimes it seems rather futile just doing a boycott. I was encouraged by your comment about South Africa and how the boycott did have an impact there. I have heard that oftentimes it's the reputation of the company that bothers them more than the actual profit loss. I'm wondering if you think that's true. Do you have any advice on the boycott? And then finally, I'm wondering if you think we're close to the tipping point.
Well, as far as the boycott goes, I think, it's like, we're trying to get through a wall with a spoon here. Um, and so every time we pick at that wall, well, we may not see a lot of difference, but I think, if we all, and it's daunting. I mean, there are so many companies on that list, and they are so interwoven into our lives that it is tough. It's like you need a scorecard. I mean, like I want to tattoo them on my arm so I know what I should not be buying. So it is daunting, but I think it's worth trying. And if you went further than, I think your thought about going further than not buying the products, but letting them know you're not buying them and why, I think that would probably have more impact than simply the how many pennies that they didn't get off of a specific Coca-Cola can.
Yeah, that's been my secondary that what I've started doing is just contacting individual companies and letting them know I'm boycotting you because of your support of the genocide.
Yeah, no, I think that's
But
a great approach to it. Is more well, it's more it's more dynamic than it's doing something as opposed to not doing something. But South Africa is a really important example. I was 9 years old when my mom read me "Cry the Beloved Country," and I was 39 when Nelson Mandela became president
hmm,
of South Africa. And so, and that seemed like kind of like the Berlin Wall. It seemed like something that could never change, that the dominance of that apartheid thinking was something that could never be changed, but it was. And that's kind of a star that I steer by, or something that I draw a lot of inspiration from, is that yes, these things are terrible and they grind on our souls, but if we work to, as collectivity, then we can change it. These things, this is not 1,000-year Reich in Palestine. Uh, this will change, and I do believe we're at a tipping point, mostly because of social media. I've dissed the students because every time a class would end, they'd all be, I call them eye zombies. They'd all have their heads in their phones. But the thing is, what have they been watching for 2 years? They've been watching a live stream genocide, and that generation is lost. I mean, they know the score. Nobody's going to know. There's no amount of propaganda that is ever going to repair the Zionist entity in their minds.
hmm,
It's over. And so I think, okay, like it took generations to end slavery on this continent. Well, I think this generation that's coming up is going to be the one that just finally says no, no.
oh, I hope so.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
yeah. I mean, the way that Students for Justice in Palestine has grown, uh, both at OSU but also at OU. I mean, I couldn't believe how many people showed up for that. It was an ACLU event, but it was about Palestine, and the room was packed. They thought 20 people would show up, and the room was packed to the walls with people. The kids, there's a change in consciousness. Muin Rabani, who I've known since he was at Georgetown, but now he's at an institute up in Canada. But he put out an article recently titled "The Dam Has Burst." And I believe this is true, that the dam on consciousness about what is really happening in Palestine has burst. And I attribute a lot of that to social media, because when I started this work, you had to work in 16 millimeter. That meant expensive equipment. That meant you had to give one kidney to Kodak and another one to the lab to be able to create any work. And now any Palestinian with a cell phone can share a moment of the actuality of their life. And I think that's the revolution in itself, that
Yeah.
the medium itself is the revolution, and it has changed things. millions of people. I mean, the numbers that you see in demonstrations in Yemen and Seoul, South Korea, and New Zealand, and around the world, that there's a different consciousness now.
We have another question. Mary Yoder is asking, as a filmmaker, what do you think of No Other Land? The fact that it's being boycotted by BDS. And I'm also, before you answer, since we're running late, I want to just call attention to the fact that I'm putting in the chat the Freedom Flotilla Coalition donate page, so that this is just another thing that we can do if that's a possibility.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, on the flotilla, look, there's an enormous human need right now, but the real need is for a free maritime corridor. That until that's established, we could pour money in there forever. So anyway, I know that there's so many really, the need in Palestine right now is just so overwhelming. But I do really support the flotilla.
And the only way that the aid is going to get in there is to end the siege, because Israel's not going to do it. But anyway,
Yeah,
we
but
should go to Mary's question.
Yeah, on Mary's, I wasn't actually aware that No Other Land was being boycotted. I suppose that's probably because Israelis are involved in the production.
Yeah.
But look,
Yeah.
but Five Broken Cameras also was edited by Israeli. I don't think that that's disqualifying. I don't like it when the voice of the film becomes the Israeli participant. That just seems like colonialism on its face. But still, I have friends who were there. A guy named Bob, who was on the Handala with me. He was in the village when the guy in the sort of protagonist in No Other Land was killed. I mean, he was practically beside him when that happened. So the people involved in making that film are good people, and there was a point where Greta Berlin was being boycotted too. She was being canceled out of the movement. And she was one of the first people to go out on a boat and risk her life to try to break this siege. So I think that there in every movement there are saboteurs, and I think that's just got to be part of the reality that we have to cope with.
Thanks.
And it's good to see you, Mary. Mary is one of the stars of Two Blue Lines, my film. She is doing really, really wonderful volunteer work outside of Hebron, outside of Khalil for years. So, salute.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mahmoud, you're silly. Yes, please do join JVP. They have been the point of the spear. They have been the point of the spear, and I hope that the JVP, not only in New York and Washington, but that every chapter can start putting skin in the game, and aggressive, nonviolent action to press our government to end its crimes against itself. It's so. The fact that this aid is actually a crime in itself in our country, let alone the criminal impact of the policy, but that it's a violation of our own law by all of these people who get elected by talking about law and order. That just really makes me crazy. So let's see. I think that's all the questions. I hope this.
I have one more.
Oh,
Um, I saw in the chat a link for donations to your organization, the Flotilla. Do you think that is the best way to contribute to Palestine? I'm on Facebook. I get requests from people there. You know, any little amount, please send money. They send pictures of their kids and they tell their stories of their family. You know, I don't have a lot of money, but sometimes I send them a little bit, which they're very thankful for. But is there one particular way that is the most effective to get help to the people on the ground there?
well, I have huge qualms about these Facebook pleas for funding because I have this horrible feeling that it's some IDF soldier that while he's not killing people, he's on a beach in Tel Aviv pitching me for money.
Mm.
I mean, if you don't know the people or if you don't have a personal connection to them, I'd be very leery of that. You know, so for example, I have a woman who worked as a translator for me was able to get asylum in Canada. She did a GoFundMe to try to get her sister out of Gaza. Okay, well, all right, I know those people, but I would be really, really leery. And you know, and the thing is that there are 2 million desperate stories in Gaza, but
Right.
I do want to say the Freedom Flotilla is not my organization. In fact, you know, it's not like a club or there's no membership card. It's a completely volunteer organization. So I've had the privilege of sailing with them, but it's not my organization. I just absolutely support what they're doing, and I do think that any help that they can get in this effort to just keep wearing on this siege. Because as consciousness rises, then every time one of these of aid is hijacked, then more people are going to get pissed off about it. If they don't get through, at least it raises the specter of the blockade. Because I do worry that this ceasefire, that people are going to sort of relax. You know, that there aren't going to be heaps of mangled children on their cell phones every day. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to still be dying in mass because of the destruction of the means of life in Gaza.
All right. Okay, thank you. And thank you for your work. It's really admirable. Appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and most of all, thank you, Tom, for your time and for your effort and your dedication over the years. I just can't express how thankful we are to know you, and your presentation was extremely moving. So now if everybody would just like to unmute themselves and thank Tom, that's fine, but I'll be ending the meeting. I think it's about time to adjourn. Is that okay, Tom?
Sure,
Or
Corey.
did you have anything else that you wanted to say to just finalize, or do you want to say anything um about the recent UN decision?
Oh, oh,
Maybe it's a little bit
okay,
late to get
yeah.
into that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're at 1917 all over again. That we are now, it's a new mandate. Now Donald Trump, who has sent billions of dollars in arms to blow up Gaza, is now going to be the president of the Peace Council. And they're going to dictate life there. They're going to send a new occupation in as opposed to providing self-determination. No, this is a disaster. This UN resolution is a disaster. Um, Ramzi Baroud said that the first time this international stabilization force hurts a Palestinian child, uh, this was going to blow up. It'll be, there will be 2 million people coming with sticks and knives. This is absolutely
Mm.
unacceptable. the fact that there is no Palestinian voice in any of this, it's absolutely absurd. This is just more of the same. We're all the way back to the Balfour Declaration all over again, essentially. That's what this UN resolution does, is it takes us back in time. It doesn't move us forward.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Yeah. This is bad news. This is bad news for Palestine. So break the siege. That's what I've got to say. Break the siege. One way or
Amen.
another, get on the boat one way or another, whether it's a physical boat or the boat of direct action, to try to press our legislators to come to their senses and recognize the equality of humanity.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Hey, Connie, can we access this later? Like the recording? Or
Yes.
the chat?